Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Recover You.
Hello, I'm back.
Patrick's back.
Yep.
Welcome back, Patrick.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Good to be back.
So today is an exciting day for us, the day that we're recording. We just wrapped up the Sexual Integrity 101 course that we were hosting for people that were in the local area that were interested in learning about the course and potentially passing it along to their church, or maybe starting it in their church or utilizing it as a resource in their church. So that was really exciting. That was really cool. We had several people from several different churches represented. And so we all sort of went through the materials together, and then we would discuss them as we went along, how what we were learning related to our own stories, and if something from the videos or the resource was impactful. And it was really, really good conversations, I felt like, that came out of that. And everybody has their own story and their own, is that something different would pop out and resonate for every person individually, you know?
Yeah,
so It was really cool. And the course itself, I mean, we don't get any sort of affiliate kickback for sharing this with you guys. We just think it's really great. But the course we would recommend as like a really great springboard for anybody. It's appropriate for men and women. It goes through the statistics within the church. So how many men, how many women are struggling in the church with pornography and unwanted sexual behaviors and these sorts of things. It moves into talking about the brain and the science behind how the brain works, how it responds to stress, how addiction works in the brain. It talks about dealing with our traumas, going further than just the behavior itself, but actually digging into, kind of everything that we talk about on this podcast, going deeper than the behavior, deeper than the pattern, deeper than the fear, and going into, well, what's the emotion underneath that, and what's the belief that I have underneath that, and where did that come from, and then moving into like, how can I process that, so it kind of touches on all those. Of course, it is an introductory, so you're not sitting there doing trauma work in the course, but it introduces you to all the concepts. It's really, really good.
Yeah. I think it's, for its purpose, which is to help define what sexual integrity is. I think it really does a nice job, because we're so inundated with other messages. And so like the one part of it, what was it, lesson 7 today, that they define unhealthy sexuality and healthy sexuality, which I thought was really good. And I remember even as I started to move into healing, I fully didn't know what that was. And so it's nice to see somebody actually take some time and define what that is for people. It's a really, really good resource, and so highly recommend. 10 out of 10 for people.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the things that I end up talking about with people, my coaching practice and everything, is I think sometimes we get caught up in this world of betrayal, in this world of addiction, where we begin to compare bad. We begin to compare this bad thing to this bad thing. And, what I encourage people to do instead is define what is good, right? So when we're looking at behaviors, you're like, well, it wasn't this level. It wasn't this extreme. It wasn't XYZ, fill in the blank, whatever, your particular situation is. But okay. And then and the reason this is important is because when we compare bad, people will question themselves and go, am I being unreasonable? Like, is this too much to ask? Well, part of the way we can answer that question is going, let's define what good is. Let's define what healthy is. Let's define what fidelity is. If it aligns with those things, great. If it doesn't align with that, then no, you do not need to settle for it, tolerate it, or excuse it.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of goes into that point of like, same thing with sexuality. Like, what is actually healthy? What is fidelity? What does living in integrity look like?
Right.
And when you know what that looks like, and we even mentioned this, and we might even talk about it later in the episode today, but having that defined, having that clearly understood, of it helps us go, what am I moving towards? Right? So, and we talked about how my understanding of that helped me have something to believe that was possible. And really, I didn't want to, I came in with a lot of sexual wounding, not just from this betrayal, but from other things. And so having this idea of like, but wait, healthy sexuality, what is that? And is it actually possible? And can we move towards that? Was a big goal for a long time.
Yeah, you just said something. You're like, I came in with a lot of sexual wounding. It's like, as did I, as do a lot of couples, because it's either lack of information or there is wounding in there, either from abuse or, betrayal or whatever that is. And so that's why it's so important to define what the healthy side of that can be, because so many of us are just being taught by television or social media or friends or whatever. And in a lot of cases, they're all wrong and it's not healthy.
Because the world would sort of define it as like frequency of having physical engagement, right? As opposed to what we're talking about, defining healthy sexuality. Sex is coming from connection. It's not the avenue to create connection.
Right.
You have emotional intimacy. You feel seen. You feel loved. You feel respected. You feel valued. And then sex can be an expression of that. And so it's a very different perspective. Yeah. All right. So today we are going to talk about 3 mindsets that set you up for success in recovery. I did think when we were talking about this, I was like, well, we could talk about things that hinder people's recovery. I was like, no, I wanted to, I was like, let's
turn it positive.
Let's reframe it into the positive because, sometimes that's important. That's sometimes important. Yes. But we will talk about, while we are talking about some of the things that help us become successful, we will also sort of address, a little bit of the opposite and why that's a problem. So, all right. So what's going to help set us up for success? We're going to talk about 3 things, 3 mindsets, and we're going to sort of address them in relation to the addicted partner and the betrayed partner. Because again, we all can have the same, we've talked about this, like we can all fall into similar patterns, but they just manifest very differently. So the same things. So the first mindset is I am more than my circumstances or my behavior.
Right.
That is really important. And that goes into identity and value, which we've talked about a lot. And I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think it's episode 7. Actually, that might be right. I think it's episode 7 when we talked about identity in addiction and the importance of not allowing addiction to become your identity, and the importance of language with that, and how your brain and how your subconscious interprets how you speak to yourself and how it interprets language specifically. So I am statements versus I struggle with statements, or, I'm having this experience. Those kinds of things are really important because we must believe, I think, in order to move forward in life, that I am more than my circumstances or behavior. Like I'm a person of value. I'm a person of worth just because I exist. Like we talked about this in I think it was 2 episodes ago when I was sharing my talk, and I was talking about value. Like you are valuable just because you're a human being. Like you don't actually have to accomplish something for that to be true. You don't have to do more than you are. You are valuable. And so I think when we're talking about being successful in recovery, really understanding that we do have value and worth is going to help us, because it helps us understand that we are more than the things that happen to us. We are more than the things or the mistakes that we make. And that's an important awareness.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and I've talked to a lot of guys that will say, well, it's just a fight I'm going to be in the rest of my life. And sometimes it's like the verbiage you use. So like, I would agree that this is an area of awareness that you need to maintain awareness. But from a healthy sexuality standpoint, right? So, awareness would be, you don't want to just automatically, after you've been healed and you stop the behavior, just kind of letting anything in through your eye gaze, right? So just watching whatever on TV, even if you're not going to engage in the behavior, right? So maybe that's something that you've gained awareness over time, and you go, I don't think this is a very good thing for me to watch, right? That maybe you wouldn't have done before. So in that sense, yeah, you have changed your behavior, but it doesn't mean that you have to fight it. You know what I mean? You just make as you get into healing, you just make a good decision. You go, okay, before I watch this show, let me just double check real quick and go, nope.
Common sense media.
Yeah, I got some information and that's a no, or I got some information and that's a, hey, no problem.
Yeah.
And then you just move forward. So it's a much more calm thing than to say I fight. Maybe it's more like I exercise discernment over my thought life, and I use good resources to help me through some hard things for the rest of my life, because that's not something I did before, because I engaged in unhealthy coping patterns.
Healthy recovery is not fear-based.
Right.
And so let me read this thread that I posted the other day, because it goes into the negative side of this. The positive side is that we do believe that we're more. The negative side that will keep people stuck is really this concept that, to your point, this is something I have to struggle with forever. So this is why I posted the other day. If men don't struggle with lust, they are either dead or lying. This is what 2 Christian men on TikTok just said. This is the fundamental problem with communication in our faith communities. Men are told from young ages that essentially they have monkey brains and there is no hope. They have literally been conditioned through comments like this over their life to objectify women because they're taught that that's how they're made. It is possible as a man not to view women as objects. In fact, that should be the expectation, not the exception. Not all men struggle with lust, so stop telling boys that's their destiny. If men do, then we have to stop teaching them that it will be something that they struggle with forever. Christ offers freedom. God created a brain that is flexible and can be renewed, healed, transformed. If someone struggles, yes, it takes work, but freedom is possible. We live into what we deeply believe, and I see this in recovery community all the time. People who, I said men, but I'm just going to generalize it to people who deeply believe that struggling is their destiny will continue to struggle. Mm-hmm. People who truly believe that healing is possible and then engage in the recovery work, guess what? Heal. And there is a difference between sobriety, just don't do the behavior, and recovery, that thing no longer holds power over me. Recovery is freedom, and it's possible for anyone who wants it. Part of the reason we have such a rampant problem with sex and porn addiction within the church is because there is this message that it's just part of being a man. So, and I said, start teaching the truth, start teaching freedom, start hosting actual recovery ministry in your churches. Lust is not inevitable because of your maleness. So I think that is a really important concept, because we have to believe that we are more than this thing. Mm-hmm. And I think what is unfortunately being taught to men, to boys, culturally and in faith communities, is that is just who you are. There's no escaping it. And what's really damaging is when somebody is actively struggling with it, that it's basically communicated as, well, that's the rest of your life. Right. So what we want to teach is what I believe is the truth, which is that freedom and recovery is available to anyone that wants it. And so the mindset that we want to have is that I'm so much more than my circumstances. Like, this isn't who I have to be.
Right.
For a betrayed partner, that can show up in similar ways. It can show up like this experience, so the betrayal itself is traumatic. So again, if we're thinking that we are more than our circumstances, we can transcend. I always have trouble with words when we're recording. Transcend that idea into this experience is traumatic, but it doesn't have to define me.
Right.
So we can again kind of take that mindset of like, this is something that is an experience in my life, but I am more than this experience than is happening to me. And that's particularly important for the betrayed partner, because it's not something that you chose. It's not something that you did. It was something that was perpetrated onto you and something that happened to you. So we need to remember, this is an experience that I'm currently navigating, but this trauma does not have to ultimately define who I am. I'm more than that experience.
Well, and also too, like I remember going through this myself, obviously early on in recovery, and maybe even a year or two into it, it was this whole notion of I used to believe that I was a horrible husband, right? And so it took me a while in my healing to start to shift that and be like, no, actually, I'm a good husband. You know what I mean? Yes, I did a bad thing, and I should suffer the consequence, and I will always be sorry, to you for having done that. but I've also learned how to show up, and I've also learned how to be, your comfort and care when you need it. And I've also learned how, you know what I mean? So all of these different things. So it's like, those two things can exist. They absolutely can exist, and one doesn't overshadow the other. So, for example, one overshadowing the other would be, well, I did this to you, so I'm just a bad husband. Or, hey, no, but I'm a good husband, so this shouldn't bother you, right? So, like, they both can exist in the same thing, is that behavior hurt you. And I've turned into a really, I hope, a really good husband who's there for you and wants to, carve out a life. And I think we have a great, a great time together, and we're connected and we're intimate and all these different things. Like, all of that stuff exists. And so, but the outcome of the story 4.5 years in is I'm no longer this guy that couldn't escape from it. I'm actually, somebody that has been able to turn the story into something of help.
Well, and you and I were talking about that a little bit earlier. While you were going through this in the beginning, in the early stages, you were always very committed to the recovery process, but you did have those moments of doubt. Like, is this, and I think part of that doubt came from a lot of the negative messaging that we're just sort of mentioning of, oh, this is just something people are going to struggle with, because you read a book that was promoting that idea.
Yeah.
And you had this like wave of like, what if that's true? And I have to deal with this the rest of my life. And I was able to come in and be like, that's ridiculous. It's possible for this not to be an issue for you. And let's get rid of that thinking.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I think it's really important, because we all have doubt at times. And that goes into the whole idea of like why community is really important in healing, because if we're left to our own devices, our most insecure moments have the opportunity to take over when we are feeling tired or weak or overwhelmed or whatever it might be. And that's when those thoughts are going to come in. It's like, well, I can't do it. Well, if I can't do it, then ultimately, what's the point?
Yeah. And I do remember, what was the thing I used to say? That I was going to, like, you were going to go to the store and I was going to go run into the woods and relapse. I think I always said run into the woods. I don't know why, but it was like this mindless monkey, right? And so, but I do, but part of that was born out of reality too, because in my private struggles, I could not quit, right? So like there had been nothing yet that had shown me anything that was going to prove to me that I wouldn't live that way.
Right.
So that took a little bit of time.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we talk about it, because I don't want anyone listening to ever think that they have to be a mindless monkey.
That's right.
Right? Like,
that's right. Yeah.
That's kind of the point. I hate the messaging. That communicates that to people, that says, oh, this is just, you're just going to have, because it gets communicated to women too. So, the second mindset is that healing is kind of, these overlap a lot, but healing is possible for everyone. And it requires change, and change is uncomfortable. And this is just reiterating kind of what we just said, that I am completely convinced that true recovery and freedom, meaning that people can live in freedom from it, that it's not an issue, that they're not relapsing, is absolutely possible for anyone that's willing to do the work. But, or you could say, or why doesn't that happen? Why isn't the percentage of people who get into recovery groups that recover 100% then? Because it requires change, and change is so uncomfortable. And I do think, when we talk about that, it's not to like slap you across the face and create some sort of shock value. It's because I think when we as humans have information about what a process looks like, what am I about to go into? It can be nerve-wracking, it can be scary, but if we know that it's beneficial, we're going to be so much more willing to do it. And so I think it's not fair to act like recovery is this thing that you just, you're two people that want to do the right thing, and so you go to a group and then everything's going to be fine. Like it does require work. It does require effort. Change is super uncomfortable. There's a lot of things that go into it that are, your whole life is upended for both people if you're really diving into it. I mean, everything about your life is different, because you're thinking about life differently. And for the addict, they might go through withdrawal. They might experience relational discomfort, as boundaries are set up. They might have dramatic changes in their lifestyle. There's all sorts of things. I mean, for you, travel was off the table for a long time for work. You weren't traveling for a long time. Just your morning routine had to change. Navigating your phone without the internet. I mean, there's so much about just the day-to-day stuff that changed. And that is a shock to the brain. That's what we mean when we say it's like uncomfortable. It's like, we like patterns where humans are beings of pattern. And that's what feels most familiar, most comfortable. And so anytime we come in and we go, well, this has to be different, 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 it's a lot. And the same thing happens for the betrayed partner. So we have the trauma of the discovery itself. We have to start setting up boundaries that we've never had to set up before. We're going to experience a lot of mood swings, whether it's depression or anxiety or anger. We have to start thinking through all the things that we want to set up logistically, maybe like you were sleeping in a different room for months and months and months, and navigating life and communication and, getting connected to the resources and reading books and getting educated, right? And then through that process, again, it's this thing that's done to us. And there's this question of, well, why do I have to suffer when it's not my fault? Right? So some of these things that are really, really, really healthy, that's really beneficial for growth, like just for an example, like the physical separation, or we've talked about how long it took us to reconnect physically and things like that, and saying, no, we're not going to have sex for a long period of time. No, we're not going to do this. No, we're not going to do that, whatever, while safety is established and while trust is rebuilt. Sometimes that was ultimately very, very beneficial. It laid this foundation that was, I think I would say at this point, stronger than the foundation we had started our relationship with, right? But sometimes that's really hard for betrayed partners because they go, why should I suffer? Why do I have to give this thing up? Why do I have to change my life? And it's not fair. And that's a valid frustration. And so that's where I think always going back to that vision of like, healing is possible. And then going back to what you were talking about early, defining like what is healthy? What does that look like? Like sexuality, what is healthy sexuality? Relationships, what is a healthy relationship? Communication, what is healthy communication? These are the things that we really want to identify and get clear on, because when we come against these bumps in the road through recovery, it's going to help us continue to navigate forward, as long as we know that this difficult thing that I'm going through right now has a payoff in the end.
As you talk about, healing is possible for everyone, but requires change, and change is uncomfortable. Our brains and patterns in our lives are perfectly designed to get us the current results that we're getting. So, for example, my, before discovery, everything that was going on in my brain and my morning routine was perfectly designed to be an addict, right? That was and that's why it couldn't change. So when I was discovered and we went into these patterns, that was disrupting all of that. So then you can argue today that my brain patterns and my life is perfectly designed to deliver me a life of recovery. And so the same thing, but that took a lot of change. And the same thing for, if you're feeling stuck in this, then you've got to, I always, and I use this when I coach leaders too, is, your organization is perfectly designed right now to deliver the results that you're getting. And so the same thing goes for us in recovery is at that point where you start to feel stuck, or when it's time to change, you got to say, hey, what's happening right now? And I think you were always really good about that. Like, we've got to move forward. We've got to do something, relationally to move forward. I think at I think individually our healing always seemed to move much faster than our relational healing. And then, kudos to you. You would say now it's time to disrupt the relational thing again. And some of that could have been as you individually healed, you were ready to take that next step, and I was standing in reserve, kind of respecting what you wanted. You know what I mean? But there was probably a little bit of a disconnect where I didn't notice that you were ready to move, and maybe I stayed, and then you got frustrated with that. Yeah,
I kind of talk about that part of the healing journey like a stair step. So if you think about stepping up onto the step, it requires effort, it requires intentionality, it requires muscle involvement. So it's like that disruption that you're talking about. It's an effort, it's, there's thought involved, it's on purpose. And then when you get up to that step, there's like that landing, right? And so once you do something hard relationally or individually in your healing, it bumps you right up to this new level of healing. You're like, oh, this is great. This feels so good because it's better than it was the last time. I went through the discomfort of the vertical change and now I can sit on the horizontal part for a little while. And I encourage people to rest there because what happened, what you're describing, my gut and my intuition told me when the rest was now done. Basically, I was like, okay, I have to rest. I have to recover. I have to enjoy this level of the healing. And this hard thing that we just accomplished. Now, over time, that becomes the new normal. And then you're like, okay, I have the reserves, I have the resilience, I have the healing to do the next step. Right. And so I do think that's a very intuitive process. And I do think healing too is part of that is becoming more aware of our intuition and learning how to trust that. Right. And so, yeah, that was a super intuitive. There was no, well, it's been a month. Time to take the, I was just, because sometimes it would be months and months and months and months and months before we would move forward. But then I'd kind of come and be like, hey, we've been doing really great. I'm really happy about where we've come and how far we've come, but we've got to keep going because if I take where we're at right now and project it 10 years in the future, like that's not okay. Right. So,
but I think, if you think about point one, which is, I'm more than my circumstances. And if you feel like you're, from the addict standpoint, that you're constantly struggling and you're constantly white knuckling it and things like that, it's because your current system is designed to keep you in a white knuckling state. So you're going to have to find a way to disrupt that again. Maybe it's a new group, maybe it's a new therapist, maybe it's some sort of software, maybe your journaling life is
one more time. You know what? It's like Psych, if you ever watch that show, Find the Pineapple. Yeah. We're going to start Patrick has to say the word journal at least once in every episode. Can you find it?
There was the previous episode was about journaling, and there was no nod to me.
I did think about it.
Sort of acknowledgement.
I totally thought about it. I was like, oh, Patrick and his guided journaling.
Yeah, in my opinion, it was the best episode ever. Yeah. Journaling. But my point is if you take the first lesson of no, you don't have to sit in this constant fight. Activation, white knuckling, running away from just normal activities. What's happening is you haven't reached that level, so you're gonna have to make your system uncomfortable again, and in whatever way that is. So if you're, once again, if the men's group that you're in is not helping you push forward, it's okay to go get another men's group. Sometimes your utility that you've gotten out of meeting with a group of men, sometimes that does end. And it's okay. And it's really nothing wrong with the group that you were part of. It's just, hey, now it's time to take another healing step. Maybe you need to go to an intensive. Maybe you need to go to an inpatient sort of rehab thing or something. Who knows? But the point is don't be afraid to do something that kickstarts that a little bit more.
Well, to that point, and kind of what we mentioned earlier, is anything that's fear-based is not ultimately going to succeed. And one of the things that we can be afraid of is our own brain, our own self. And so I can imagine it would be similar for an addict, but when I had intrusive thoughts, I was terrified of like myself because I was like, why am I having these thoughts? I was terrified of my brain. And I was like, where is this coming in? And so for me, it was really learning that I don't have to be afraid. I'm always in control. And so I think that's something that an addict can really take away is like you have everything within you that you need. You don't have to be afraid. And I think as soon as we calm the fear down and our nervous systems can begin to align, then that's where the empowerment comes from of I know myself, I know what I'm capable of, and I know that I'm capable of healing, and I know that I can make, at every moment I'm making choices. And I don't act on every thought that pops up into my head. So I'm a capable human being who can choose moment by moment to live this healthy life. And then to your point with the patterning, the more we do that, the more relaxed we are. We're not afraid of these things that pop in. We're not afraid of ourselves. Then we begin to engage in the healthy patterning. All of a sudden that becomes the baseline. That's the easy part. Just as easy as it was before, right? So the more I became, it was for me, I feel like I can relate a lot when it comes to the fear of your thinking, the fear of your brain, the fear of yourself, because I really lived through some difficult phases of my life where like I was just really scared of my own mind.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is going on? Because it makes you think you're a bad person. It makes you wonder who you are and challenge your own identity. And so getting educated about it and learning that I didn't have to pay attention to that. I didn't have to give any value to it. I didn't have to assign any meaning to it. I could just let things come and go in my brain. Allows your brain to calm down, allows your nervous system to calm down, and then you feel more in control. And then the thoughts really calm down. Your brain becomes a safer place. Your nervous system drops into safety more and more. And then from that place, a thought pops in and you're like, oh, whatever. I know myself. Yeah. That's not,
right.
That's not who I am. That's just a thought.
As you're telling that story, it reminds me, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, there's that gentleman's club in the town we live in. And I used to get so like anxious and tight just driving by it. And it was like nothing. And so now I don't even think about it. And so much more like when I flew to Philly, and this is when you leave the airport, there's some billboards for all kinds of things, attorneys or whatever. And there was one time I was driving, there was a billboard for a gentleman's club. And I remember what came over me was it wasn't a trigger. It wasn't anything. I actually said a prayer. It was just like a general prayer because there's a lot of pain and suffering there and things like that. So it wasn't, if you compare it to like the first year of recovery where I was like, like I'm going to drive, like it had nothing to do with anything. It was just my nervous system being activated, a much more responsible, healed response now to that kind of a signal, I guess you could say. Yeah,
I mean, I think ultimately that healing is a process of feeling safe, feeling calm, feeling aligned, and learning, how to support your body and getting to that place.
Right.
Because then life feels so much more manageable. And I think it does, to an extent, come from a little bit of an educational logic, because the nervous system is all limbic and it's all sort of in the subconscious. So I do think this is where the conscious and the subconscious help each other out. When we consciously know, hey, this is what's happening. We have enough education to like understand this is what's happening to my nervous system. This is the part of my brain that's activated. I don't actually have to assign value to that. It doesn't mean anything about me. That's the conscious recognition. Then that translates down into the subconscious, because if we don't assign meaning to it, then everything can calm down.
Right.
And so then we interrupt that pattern and we disrupt it. But I was thinking too, as you were talking about the, making different, how did you say it? We're perfectly designed to get the results and the behavior that we're getting. Yeah. So for me, I used to be a personal trainer. I did like a little tiny fitness competition. I used to work out all the time and, all this kind of stuff. And then I got cancer, and then I went through chemo, and then my body changed. And then betrayal came a year and a half after I got done with chemo. And so it was essentially to some extent, I was still recovering from that. And then this happened, and then it, took a really hard hit. So patterning wise, I really got into rest, recovery, which is really, really important. And I encourage everybody to do that. But getting out of that and creating this pattern of trying to, okay, if I'm not working out in the morning, I want to try to get in the sauna, like doing something that's beneficial for my body, more regularly. That right at this point in my life has been a challenge, because I'm like, okay, I have to create this new pattern. And part of it is that I just like forget. So I've like put these alarms on my phone that are like, reminding me when to do it, giving me a list of things I can do, stuff like that. Do the sauna, do the vibration plate, do the, working out, do, whatever, and all these different options, right? To move, to get my lymph system moving, to exercise, whatever it is. And so, but that's, right now, that's the effort that I'm making. Remember to do this and then engage in that. And then eventually it'll become,
it kicks into a habit.
Yeah. But that's just an example of like, I used to be really good at that. And right now it's a different phase of life. So the third mindset is this idea that there is, like, it's this belief that there is something better available to me in life. So purpose, transformation, healing, whatever that is in whatever particular circumstance you're thinking about. So for me, right, more energy, getting a little bit in better shape, those sorts of things. Those are totally possible. And so if I don't believe they're possible, then I'm really, if I deeply, deeply, deeply believe that that's not possible, then I will engage in patterns that will prove that to me. So it's important that the beliefs that I hold are true, that they, and that they are forward moving and healing beliefs, because then I can live into that and practice that, even if it is uncomfortable, even if it is difficult, even if the pain increases. Like today, my legs are so sore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm like waddling around the house. Like I can feel it. I think I talk about this all the time, but like I feel like emotional healing and recovery is so parallel to anything physical. And I love to bring physical examples in because we're so much more familiar with them. But the pain increases, there's recovery time, there's the transformation. I mean, it really doesn't matter what you're talking about.
Yeah,
It really
Right as you're talking about that, I was like, yeah, if you sign up to run a 10K at the end of October with your buddies, and then at the finish line they have a little beer garden, you're gonna have a couple beers. So in order to get ready for that, you work through the training, you work through the blisters, and you work through all of that. It makes it worth it to get to that point because you have a goal.
The goal was the beer, or the goal?
Both, versus me, who I just like to get out and run anyway.
You love running, yeah.
But that's got a goal too, though. It's a goal of fitness. It's a goal of feeling good. It's all of those different things. So yeah, you're more apt to put up with something that, as they say in the military, embrace the suck. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? If you're moving in a particular direction, because certainly if you look at the level of pain between you and I in the first 2 years. Would it have been easier in that particular case to split up and go off and live our own lives? Probably. Oh yeah. Yeah. You know what I mean? It would have been like, I wouldn't have had to answer any more questions about my addiction.
I could have gone on and just been like living my life.
Yeah. You would have, had fun with somebody new or whatever. And you know what I mean? And Keegan wouldn't have had to say, you know what I mean? So it's like, in the immediacy of the moment, right? It would have been easier, but we wouldn't have achieved where we've gotten to now.
I really like my life.
That's right. Yeah, me too. I like this life together that we've created, and it really came out of the ashes. I mean, it really, really did.
We had to burn it all down.
Yeah.
So for the addict, when we're talking about there's something better available to me, something you talk about a lot is finishing well. So I think for every person, right, whether you're married or whether you're single, this might be a little different, but like recovery is going to bring something beneficial always. Like it will change when it comes to changing, when it comes to healing. Sorry, how did I just say that? Change when it comes to healing,
right,
is always going to have some sort of benefit in the end. And so for you talk about when you say finishing well, you literally mean being able to die at the end of your life or any day, depending on what happens, feeling like you are living an authentic life with integrity.
Yeah. I mean, there's the integrity part to it, but there's also the relational part to it. I mean, even folks who aren't addicts, like you see them leave the workplace at the end of a career, and they really like go out in weird ways and stuff like that. And it's like you have a real opportunity when you end something, right? Either let's say a work career or, to your point, a life, right? And how are people going to view it? Are they going to be like, man, was he a horrible person? Geez, rest in peace, or whatever, or like, he really went through a process. He changed, he made amends, he did all of these things. And then after he had gone through the process and made amends, he worked very hard to give us all a better life and to give himself a better life and to heal and be present for people. I mean, so I think about that, like, humility. He gained humility. So I mean, I really, I've thought deeply about that notion of finishing well. And, as I, let's say I'll work another 10 years, how can I finish work well? How can I, and then, whatever happens, not that something's going to happen with us relationally, but like whatever happens in our life through the end of life, how can I make your decision to stay with me worth it? And I think it's not by buying you jewelry. I think it's by being present and delivering a safe life for you.
So you disagree with the guy on social media that said I should divorce you the other day so that you could find somebody more willing to work on the marriage?
I was going to ask you, not on the podcast, if you could work on the marriage a little bit more. Could you? since we broached the topic.
Oh my gosh, that comment was insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've both worked really hard. So thinking about something better being available, from the betrayed partner side, like, what does that mean? And again, this can happen regardless of whether you stay in the relationship, right? Because we've talked about this a lot, where doing the healing work, identifying the emotions or the patterning in our lives that is not helping us, patterning that is hindering us, patterning that is hurting us, emotions that come up regularly that are uncomfortable, in terms of like I have a nervous system activation, or I'm getting anxiety all the time, right? When we're willing to really look at these things and go, well, where are they coming from and why are they here? And let me change the environment and let me create safety and let me do the work to address all of these things. It doesn't matter if you stay with your partner or not. Your life will improve because you improve and your relationships improve. This is not something that has just impacted our relationship. This is something that changes the way I think about the entire world. It changes how I interpret humans. There's probably a lot of conversations where you and I will have where we might be listening to something or hearing a story of something, and then instead of, making too many assumptions, you have a question of, I wonder what that person went through.
Yeah.
Right. It's just it's a different perspective. I wonder why, what happened in their life, what pain happened that caused this outcome. Right. And so it's just a different way of viewing the world, which I believe really provides a lot more empathy, a much more loving approach, human to human.
Yeah.
And so, when you're thinking of being a betrayed partner, you can have a better relationship when two people are invested in making that happen. But you can have better relationships with your family. You can have better relationships with your friend. If you end up divorcing and finding a new partner, you're going to have a completely different perspective on life when we engage in this level of introspection and self-work and emotional processing and trauma work and those sorts of things. And it just helps us address. Just the other day, as a coach who does subconscious processing and emotional processing and trauma work with clients all the time, I went to one of my friends who's trained in the same modalities and said, hey, I have this belief that's coming up. My nervous system gets activated. I think I know what it's connected to, and it had nothing to do with Patrick or betrayal. I think I know what this is connected to. Can you, does somebody want to help me with this? Because I messaged two of my friends, and one of them was like, yeah, I have time. Do you want to schedule it next week? And so we found a time, and the other day, it blew me away because there was so much that came up in that session where I was able to understand myself more deeply, and I was able to see things in a completely different light. And what happened that really shocked me was that the exercise we did, and I had no idea it would take me here, took me back to an event in my childhood that I thought I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours over the decades processing this event already, processing this experience. And then this one thing that's currently showing up in my life, which I'll just share because it's not like this vague kind of ambiguous thing, but is like this, my nervous system will get activated when I feel like I need to stand up to or communicate with any level of conflict or disagreement to what may be considered someone that is in a place of perceived authority. And so that makes my nervous system really just kind of get, it's like not really, it kind of gets activated. And I was like, logically, I know that like if I'm doing the right thing and I'm communicating well and, all these kinds of things that I will communicate, I'll do what I need to do, all these kinds of things. I'd really like to be able to move forward the same way that I am without maybe the nervous system activation, right? Can I become more safe in my own body when these situations come up? And again, that's like your body remembering an experience, even though this is a different experience, years later or whatever. So anyway, my friend took me through this exercise and it connected it to something I never would have. My logic brain would never have said, oh yeah, it was this experience that I've spent hours and hours and hours already processing. So it's just, the subconscious is so amazing. And the deep healing work is so amazing. And it really helped me understand where that belief came from, how I could change it, who I am as a person and what I'm allowed to step into, which is the whole idea with these exercises, that we identify the negative, but we replace it with the positive.
Right.
And so that your body is more likely to believe that in the future.
Well, and sometimes I don't like the term fake it till you make it, but I do like the term of articulating a future state that you want to achieve and not necessarily knowing how you're going to get there. So, here we've talked about this before, where you can work on, it's important to work on your individual healing. That doesn't always mean that your relationship is going to survive. And so it's important to decouple your healing from the status of your relationship. A healed individual, two healed individuals, possibly 98%, maybe whatever that is, are going to actually be able to restore their relationship, possibly. But without healing, you're not going to be able to restore your relationship in an effective, meaningful way. So I think, I know, for myself, I had a clear vision of where I was going to go individually. I didn't have a clear vision. You did. I didn't have a clear vision of where we were going to go relationally. And that was part of my own wounding and my own negative beliefs in myself as a value in a relationship. Right. I actually had to heal that, and you helped me heal that. And so, so you were able to carry that for a long time until I remember the first time I said to you, I'm a catch. It was, and I was joking because that's what we were doing. I almost didn't say it. Like, it was like, it didn't just roll off my tongue, right? It was kind of like, is she going to agree? Is it, you know what I mean? Is she going to be like, no, you're not? You know what I mean? Like,
well, if you had said that like 6 months in.
Well, of course not. Of course not. But it was it was right. Perfectly fine. And I was probably overdue saying it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's just but I always had a clear sense once I got the tools that I could heal. Right. Once, in a very short order, once I got the tools, I was like, yep, this is going to happen. And so one of the things that has kind of come up recently with me is the notion of being, and I don't know if it's so recent, but I've been thinking more and more about it, the notion of being a safe man. I just want to be a safe man. And so, that means a lot of things, right? It can cover a lot of ground. But at the end of the day, what does it mean in my relationship to you? What does it mean in my relationship to Keegan? What does it mean in my relationship to my coworkers? And, there's slight variations on that. But the theme is very clear. It's acting with integrity. It's being clear. It's being positive. It's being encouraging. It's being all of these different things. Mm-hmm. And so, but that has been, as finishing well has, or gonna get the healing turned into finishing well has turned into I'm a safe man. You know what I mean? So right. There's been iterations on this, but clearly I wanted to make sure I highlighted that from a relational standpoint, it was hard for me to understand where we were going. You did a much, much better job defining that than I did.
Well, I did hold that vision, but I was positively influenced from some external influences, if I can use the word twice. Mm-hmm. But especially in the realm of sexuality. So I came in with my own hurt, my own baggage when it comes to sexuality. And I was able to thankfully be exposed to some resources that reiterated to me. Maybe I had the hope that it existed. Maybe I had a belief that, like, in a utopic society, the way we were created, maybe that I thought, all right, maybe that seed was already planted, that it was a possibility, right? Mm-hmm. But I thankfully had some exposure to, hey, this is real, this is possible, and this is what that looks like, and this is what that means. And so going all the way back to when you were talking about earlier, unhealthy versus healthy, I think sometimes we only get taught what's unhealthy. And so being told, again, that sex is an outcome of intimacy, it's not the avenue for intimacy. Mm-hmm. Having physical relations with your partner does not make you more emotionally connected. It gives you a false sense because of the chemical hits, just like addiction, in the moment. But if there's not good communication, if there's not respect, if there's not emotional intimacy outside of that physical experience, then it is a false sense. And so being able to be exposed to some things that we're talking about when you're engaging physically, that it can be almost like this spiritual connection thing. Reiterated to me, okay, if that's possible and we're going to go through all of this pain, like I want to move towards something that is really, really healthy and really beneficial and really worth everything that we're going to go through to get there.
Yeah.
So the three things, just to sort of reiterate here at the end, these are mindsets that are going to set us up for success through recovery. 1, I am more than my circumstances. 2, healing is possible for everyone, but it requires change, and change is uncomfortable. And 3, where did 3 go? In my little notes here. There is something better. Yeah, there is something better available to me. So whether that's the specific avenue of one area of your healing, or just that there is a purpose for you as you move through this, or that transformation is possible, or that achieving health is possible, all of those things. But knowing that there is something better available to you as you navigate this process. That vision, getting clearer and clearer and clearer on that vision, is ultimately what helps us continue taking the steps in the right direction that help us get to that goal.
Absolutely.
Every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. So make that choice today, and we will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.